All right, welcome back to the lesson on pry and debugging. Very smooth transition. Let me share my screen. I will paste the notes for factoring thread. I'm thinking about it. Could help. I'm not going to do it later. Delete this. There we go. Those are factoring notes. Now let's talk about debugging. Shall we? Okay. What is pry? Well, pry is one of two things. One, pry is a REPL. Pry is a REPL. What is a REPL? A REPL stands for read, evaluate, print, and loop. So pry is just waiting for us to type in some Ruby commands, basically. For instance, hello class dot length. It's going to read, wait for it. It's going to read this entire line that we type in. It's going to evaluate it. And that's going to print, or this is the evaluation portion. And then it's also going to print that to the screen. The return value from hello class.length is 11. And then it's going to do a loop. So that means it's going to go back to the reading portion, waiting for it to read something else. Evaluates that, then prints the result. So hello class, the string dot split, turns it into an array of hello and class. And then it'll do the loop portion again, right? Hey, what's the next thing you want to type in here? So why is using pry, the REPL version of pry here? Why is that important? Well, it helps us experiment with different code. You may have seen me pop this open in class just to see if something works or not. It's a very quick, cheap way to experiment with code. And I use it a lot to just figure out, hey, does this method work or not? For example, a student asks, how do you like pluralize something? I was like, well, is there a method called pluralize on a string? No, there's not. Undefined method pluralize. It exists as part of, it's a Ruby on Rails method, basically. Or, for example, you're going to need to split a string at some point. How does split work? Well, split takes the thing you want to split on. So let's just say we want to split on every single letter. We would pass an argument of an empty string. If you want to split on every single space, then I'll turn it into an array and split off the space. Or let's say we want to split on every instance of the letter L, or every occasion the letter L. It would give us an array and split. Ass, funny dude, based off the letter L. I didn't think that was gonna happen. That's funny. So yes, pry is a interactive environment. It is a REPL, read, evaluate, print loop, where it can test out writing some code. Okay. Let's look at my favorite game. Tic-tac-toe. Y'all love it. Here we are in tic-tac-toe. So the second thing pry is, first, it's a REPL. Second, it's a debugging tool. Let's talk about how we require pry. How do we require pry? Well, we could, where we want to pry, we do require pry. First, you would need to do gem install pry to make sure you have that gem on your computer. And you can do require pry, semicolon, binding.pry. I almost forgot the command. So how does pry work as a debugging tool? Well, whenever this line of code is hit here on 17, Ruby will pause the process, basically. It'll stop right there, that moment in time. So let's say I was running this board spec that tests this method that I created called horizontal win, question mark. Well, horizontal, so what that would do is called the horizontal win method here, right? And then our pry will get hit, and then the Ruby code will stop right there. So let's see that happen. Uninitialized constant board. Oh no. Uninitialized constant board. Okay, let's just require board then to make that go away. lib/lib/board. There we go. Delete some of these things. Okay. There we go. We've now triggered our pry right here on line 17. We've triggered our pry. So it pauses at this point in the code. One thing we do when we hit our pry is we could test anything about this instance, right? This board instance. We could see what the spaces are at this point in time. That's the way spaces look like. We could see other things about this. We could say, hey, does the mark method work as we expect it to? Which takes a piece and a position. Neat. All right, let's look at the spaces again. Did it mark it on the last spot in line 8 or index 8? It sure did. So we often use pry to debug and test assumptions about our code. To debug and test assumptions about our code. Pry can be used anywhere in our code. So let's say we wanted to put it in the middle of this loop right here. Or spec. And we've run our code, our test here, board.horizontal win. Now we've hit the pry within this first loop. We can test things. We can test see what sequence is. What sequence? Oh, it's the numbers from 0 to 2 here. Numbers from 0 to 2. Which is not what we want necessarily. That's okay. I made errors in this code on purpose. But if you wanted to go to the next portion of the loop, you would just type in the word exit. And you can see sequence would be 3 through 5, right? It's the second thing we're iterating over here. And then we could do exit. If we wanted to exit out of the loop entirely, we would do exit and then bang. And that would get us out of the pry process we're in. Some questions. All right, Gunnar, go ahead.
This is more of like a, I guess not exactly related to the thing, but for the neon cant thing that you have, can you put that in your RSpec?
Yeah, you would put it in your .rspec file. I'll show you. You need to gem install the gem later, and then just type that question in the Slack thread, and I'll make sure to answer it for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you wanna, you have 9cat if you want a pretty kitty cat that tells you if you have errors or not. And then the pretty kitty cat, its eyes turn to X's if you fail a test. All right. Let's take a little bit of extended break here. I'll see you at 6 after, and then we won't have any breaks after that. we'll just go to the rest till noon, basically. So see you back here at 6 after.
Sorry, Bob. 6 after?
6
11.
after.
It's 11:10 right now.
Yeah, just a little bit of a longer break since we're going to go to the end of class after that.
So like 16?
That would be 4 minutes in the
Oh,
past.
16 after. Yes, thank you.
Okay, right,
Sorry.
thanks.
Here we are. Welcome back. Okay. So showed you a little bit about Pry. By the way, my former instructor at the Turing School of Software Design was the main contributor to Pry. Josh Cheek, a wonderful human being. Anyways, so we talked about Pry as a REPL and Pry as a debugging tool. Let's talk a little bit more about debugging itself. There's two types of things we run into when we're debugging. One is known as an error. So when does the error happen? That's when Ruby can't run your code because there's some sort of syntax error. Here's an example. Name error. Uninitialized constant board.
We can't see your screen.
Are you supposed to be, yeah, sharing
boy.
screen?
Gosh, that's awkward. All right. Here we go. We've run our test and we reach an error. Error happens when Ruby cannot run our code because there's a syntax error of some sort. Name error. Uninitialized constant board. What's helpful about Ruby error messages is it tells you exactly where that error is occurring. Here, it is line 3. We're referencing board, but there's no constant called board. You've probably seen this error a few times. What would we do to make that error go away? In the chat, what do we do to make that error go away? We have an uninitialized constant board. We need to require the board. That's correct. I did it earlier. Oh boy, having trouble typing. lib/board. Okay, great. So that would be an example of an error. Let's continue to run our test and figure out what's going on. While we read our error messages. Board horizontal win returns true when it has a winning condition. Failure error board.marks. We have a no method error. Undefined method marks for board. Did you mean mark? On line 9 in our code. One thing about reading an error message is read the error message out loud. Do not assume you know where the error is happening. Read it out loud. Read which line the error is occurring on. So what do I need to do to make this error go away? No method error. Undefined method marks for board. Did you mean mark? Board spec, line 9. Yes, we need to remove the S from board because there's no method called marks. Some of you, or you might think, oh yeah, I should create a method called marks to make that error method go away, but we already have a method called marks, which is what we meant to call. All right, let's run our test again and continue to go along here. Expected true, got false. Okay. Here we don't have an error in our code. What do we have? Well, this is what's known as a failure. It's a failure. We get a value we didn't expect to see as a result. Here's an example. Let's say we had a calculator class. We had a method called sum that's supposed to add two numbers together. We pass it 2 and 2, and it brings back the number 3. That is what's known as a failure. We get back a value that we did not expect. Okay, class, help me debug this. How can we debug this using pry? We have a failure in our code. We expected to get true back from board.horizontal_win, but instead we got false back. Any brave souls? Where could I put in a pry to maybe test some of my assumptions? Throw a pry in horizontal_win. Sure, Lawrence, where should I throw it in? Where should I throw in a pry? 16.5, love it. Acquire, pry, finding out pry. Great. Let's run our test. Okay, what are some assumptions we might want to test here? What are some assumptions we might want to test? Well, we might want to test what horizontals is returning. Horizontals, which is supposed to represent the horizontal rows from our spaces. Oh no, that doesn't look right. We have an array of arrays where it's 0, ... 2, 3, 5, and 7, 9. Huh. Well, I think actually we want like this to bring back the horizontals. Oh shoot, I forgot to reference these spaces. So it looks like this needs spaces. One way to fix that. Should bring back the horizontals for us. Okay. Let me exit out and run pry again. See if this horizontals is working as we expect it to. Those horizontals. Oops. Messed up here. This would be the spaces 6 through 8. Okay. I know how to count. Let's exit out of our pry and run our test again. Now let's see what the horizontals are returning. Great. These represent the horizontal places of our board. Sweet. Let's take out the pry for now. Now we know horizontals is working at least. Oh no, our test still fails. We have a failure, right? Expected true, but we got back false. What's the next thing we would want to do to debug? So we know horizontals is working. What's the next place we might want to throw in a pry here? Go down line by line. I like that. Let's go down line by line. Let's throw one here in 18.5. Sorry. Acquire, pry. Pry. All right, well, let's see what sequence is. Expected to be true, but we got back false. I thought this first horizontal line would be all X's. That's weird. Oh, my test setup's wrong. Look at that. And our test is the thing we actually need to change to make sure we get back true instead of false. That's because I see, because the sequence is wrong. Okay. We do exit bang to exit out of our loop. Let's try running our test again and see if it works. Yay, we have one passing test. Yeah, going down line by line and testing the assumptions of what these sequence is or horizontals, etc., is a good strategy. So I showed you a very contrived example of how we might use pry to debug the difference between an error and a failure, and how to read the error message. Read the whole error out loud. Do not assume where you know the error is. Verify your assumptions and try things. That should be the process of debugging. Jameson, go ahead.
Hi. Is it personal preference to test the class file as opposed to the instances that you make of the class in the test file?
I think I shy away from that as advice, because sometimes when we put pries in our test, we're kind of unsure of like where we are in our code, if that makes any sense. But if you wanted to put pries in your test file, that is fine as well. If you want to test some assumptions against it, but I normally put it in the implementing code and not the test itself.
Thank you.
Gunnar, go ahead.
Is it you want to you want to write your tests and then check your code, and then because like you kind of don't want to change your tests, correct? Like you want to just make your tests and then change your code. But sometimes, I mean, like in instances like that where you mess up your test and meant to put something, you more or less want to change your code is what I guess what I'm trying to say, more than your test.
Yeah, Gunnar, I would say in an ideal world, you write your test correctly the very first time, and then you don't have to change your test. But sometimes you do what I did, basically. You mark this space on the board by accident, right? So it's good to verify your assumptions, right? Is it your test that's wrong, or is it your implementing code? I would say more often than not, it's your code. That's, by code, I mean the application code, right? It's the actual class itself that's broken, and not your test, but sometimes it is your test, and then you need to fix how your test is written. I think it all comes back to verifying assumptions. Throw in a pry, print out different stuff, right? The spaces, what's the result of horizontals that comes back, etc. And just don't assume that you know what those values are. Just print them all out to make sure they're as you expect them to be. Sammy, go ahead.
What is the difference between putting require pry, binding pry at the top versus putting just require pry at the top and then putting binding pry in different lines of your code?
Sure. So Sammy's asking, what's the difference between doing this and this? There is no difference. The only reason we encourage you to do it on one line is you're much more likely to delete that once it's done than if you leave a require pry at the top of your file.
Is there a reason that one method would work and the other would not? So for example, if requiring everything at the top wouldn't work, but when you require it at the top and then put binding pry in a different place in your code, then it would, like you wouldn't get any errors?
I can't think of a case in my head of why that would be.
Okay, thanks.
Regina, go ahead.
So I was talking to someone and they said at their work they didn't use Ruby and they were trying to get used to this concept of not having pry. I guess maybe I misunderstood the conversation a little bit, but do all languages have something equivalent to a pry, or is it like, yeah, that's I guess my question.
Yeah, sure. I would say most languages do. JavaScript has what's known as called the debugger, although it's not as fully functional as pry is or as helpful. Yeah, lots of languages do, but not all of them are as nearly as good as how Pry works, basically.
I guess I'm like so used to it now that like, and it helps me it does everything for me. So I'm like afraid of like not having it now.
Yeah. I haven't seen a language that has a fully functional debugger as good as Pry. But a lot of times you debug your code by like writing a good test and running it and seeing what the return value is. And then so that is the not the normal way, but how you would do it in other languages. Good question, though. Zach G, go ahead.
I wanted to add on to the answer from Regina that, yeah, languages themselves don't have a lot of what Pry has, but the software you might be using later on in life does have debugging with it. So do not be afraid of not having a debugger, because there will be something out there for you.
Yeah, Zach, that's a really good call out. Like languages like Java, which is like really commonly used, has what's known as IDEs, which are code editors that help you figure out where the errors are occurring. And then so, yeah, there's other ways to debug your code that aren't just Pry, but are maybe equally as helpful. Okay.
Thank you, Zach.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. Let's play some breakout groups. Code help. Here we go. What I want you to do is clone down this erroneous creatures repo and just work through debugging the errors. So you're going to want to clone it down, run specs against here. Let's open this up. Oh, this is using mini tests. Well, should have caught that beforehand, but that's okay. How do you run a test in mini tests? Let me show you how to do that. I need to update this lesson. My bad. Okay. So I'm going to git clone erroneous creatures down here. We're going to cd into that. So you won't need to change anything in the test to make this pass, just the implementing code. So what you're going to do is do test. Nope, you're going to do the Ruby command test / and just start with centaur test, and run it. And hit enter. And then it'll give you the error message. And it looks very similar to our spec, right? No method error, undefined method plus for no class. And then so both use running these tests, binding.pry to test your assumptions and get some of these tests to pass. All right, let me put in some breakout groups. We're going to recreate them so you get some new partners. All right, I'm opening the rooms now.